Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks for the bounty of our province, our land, our resources, and our people. We pledge ourselves to act as good stewards on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
I request leave to introduce Bill number 41, the Appropriation Act 1986-87. This being a Moneyball, Mr. Speaker, honor the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, this bill provides for the Capital Projects Division appropriation of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, which has been debated in this Assembly.
The Honourable Provincial Treasurer has moved first reading of Bill number 41, the Appropriation Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund Capital Projects Division Act 1986-87. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Agreed. Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Appropriation Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund Capital Projects Division Act 1986-87, introduced by Honourable Mr. Johnston, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 43, being the Motor Vehicle Statutes Amendment Act 1986. This act redefines mopeds and motorcycles to rationalize them with the Off-Highway Vehicle Act. It introduces a charging section for driving while suspended and a penalty therefore, and rationalizes the penalty for driving while impaired or refusing to blow to 6 months rather than the discrepancy of 6 and 3 respectively.
Solicitor General has moved first reading of Bill number 43, Motor Vehicle Statutes Amendment Act 1986. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
A bill being Motor Vehicle Statutes Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honourable Mr. Rostad, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a communique from the Agricultural Ministers' Conference in Victoria.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly two gentlemen here today who serve the public in the county of Flagstaff in my constituency, Mr. Ken Esfetter, Reeve, and Mr. Glenn Miller, Chairman of the Board of Education. If they'd stand and receive the warm welcome of the House, they're in the members' gallery.
I too would like to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly three members of Municipal Council from the County of Camrose, the Reeve, Bob Prestige, the Chairman of the Board of Education, Al Bishop, and the Secretary-Treasurer, Bill Gartner. They would stand and receive the welcome usually accorded to visitors.
I'd like to introduce today two children who are visiting us from Calgary. Their names are Natasha and Zachary Pashuk, children, of course, of the MLA for Calgary Forest Lawn. I wonder if they would rise and receive the welcome of this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that mandatory seatbelt laws save money and lives. There's been recent analysis of the Ontario experience, for example, shows that such laws result in reduction in deaths, and they resulted in reduction in injuries and cost for doctors' fees of some 15%, as well as a reduction in the cost of treating accident victims of some 40%. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, as head of the government, why has the Premier not directed that there be a special study of the costs Alberta has incurred as a result of not having such a law?
Mr. Speaker, there have been a variety of people attempting studies, many of which end up being indecisive. I think it may well be that wearing seat belts definitely may be safer and prevent injuries. Mandatory wearing of seat belts is still open to debate.
I'll have to try to figure out that answer, Mr. Speaker. If you wear it voluntarily, is the Premier saying then that if you wear it voluntarily, then you will save money, but if you have it mandatory wearing a seatbelt, you won't? I'm just trying to get it clarified.
That's one of the reasons I guess we have Hansard. You'll just have to read it, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll try. We'll try to take our answers from that. But to move to the Minister of Transportation, Mr. Speaker, I have a 1976 study here from the Journal of Trauma, and what it basically says is that mandatory seatbelt legislation protects the lives of other people in the car besides the occupants, and especially children. My question is, what role has this sort of information played in the government's decision not to protect innocent Albertans with a mandatory seatbelt law?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have some difficulty with the wording of the question. I just want to see if I follow it right. If I put my seatbelt on, it protects those in the back seat if I'm wearing a seatbelt? It protects other individuals. When I'm not coming from behind, or they are from behind. Mr. Speaker, it's going to take me a day or two to digest just exactly what that is, but the seriousness of what we're talking about is the difference, as the Premier said a moment ago, between wearing seat belts and being told you have to, or the mandatory aspect of it. And certainly today we have the debate relative to the private member's bill, number 211. And as I've said on a number of occasions, outside the House, inside the House, at home, wherever the case may be, I await that debate with a great deal of interest. And I will publicly go on record again as saying where I'm coming from on behalf of my constituency that I represent, in which 62% of my constituents are against mandatory seat belts, but 100% are for seat belts.
Well, it's nice to be able to skim out of it that way, Mr. Speaker, but let me direct the last question to the Premier. And I might, for the information of the honourable member opposite, it seems to me this issue has been debated for years, and in particular was debated for hours in this Assembly on April the 21st and November the 24th, 1983.
Go again. Buckle up. Buckle up.
My question is to the Premier, why does the Premier not show some political courage and leadership by directing that Bill 211 be now placed on the order paper as a government bill?
Mr. Speaker, if it was debated in 1983, obviously the debaters didn't carry the weight of the House. We're unable to convince people to do it. That's what a legislature is all about. That's why one of the members has brought a private resolution. We're all interested in how that issue is debated in the House. It's the whole process of democracy and this legislature working.
Supplementary member for Little Bow.
To the Honourable Premier, and I've raised this question in an earlier question. It's relative to the free vote on the seatbelt question. Would the Premier consider giving notice, say this fall, in terms of a free vote resolution for the spring legislature of 1987, so that members of the legislature would have notice and as well ample time to have a community discussion with their constituents prior to that open debate occurring on the floor of the legislature. Would that be one of the alternatives open to the Premier's policy determination?
That would certainly be one of the alternatives open, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, appreciate the reps giving him a chance to get out, but I want to put a little more heat on that. Would the Premier be willing to announce to the House today that had announced, particularly in front of the House, to his backbench and to his bench, that they are free to vote whatever way they please, and that you will honor that?
Mr. Speaker, I must say the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon, if he's going to put on some heat, I've been waiting for it. I haven't noticed any. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, it's up to the House whether this matter comes to a vote.
Member for Lethbridge West.
Mr. Speaker, I have a question to the Honourable Minister of Labour, not on this issue.
But I'll ask it to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct a second question to the Premier, and it has to do with government priorities, especially in spending. In making the decision to allow the Minister of Labour a blank check budget for the law review and its excedents, which will apparently cost us, we don't have a budget, but over $200 and, well, let's say $250,000, nice round figures. It looks around there. My question is to the Premier. What comparison study was made of this expenditure versus the decision to save money by retesting aids to daily living clients who require oxygen?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, all matters are judged on their own merits. Might I say that we have in Alberta had in our throne speech, long before the current disputes that are before us in labour matters, the plan to have a full review of our labour legislation. Now, we have a chance to do that in the most comprehensive and current way possible, to make sure that we get the best possible input in coming to new conclusions. I think that since labor legislation can't be changed constantly, that it's extremely important that we have the people who are making recommendations to us obtain all the information possible and the best information possible, and then present it to us with their recommendations. I don't accept the fact, I think, that people talking about $250,000 in a headline, I think is a joke if you stick the word may in front of it. I mean, it may be $100,000. I mean, what's the impact if you're just trying to give an impression that may be completely false? And so I think we have a chance here to have some of the best people in this province travel and get the best information possible and bring it back to this province and make recommendations to it. Now, we hardly should be trying then to discredit those people before they even get started.
Supplementary. Look at them pound. Look at them pound. They're already lost credibility, Mr. Premier, and to go on a trip like this has lost more credibility. But I was talking about government priorities because the taxpayers are paying for it. And just to come back in another question, perhaps the Premier doesn't want to answer, but the Solicitor General has adopted a policy of automatic release for the young offenders facilities because they're being overcrowded. My question is to the Premier, did the Premier do any review for need of money, say $250,000 in this area, before this money should be spent on a world tour?
Right. Listen to them pound.
I really answered that question with my first answer, Mr. Speaker, and that is these matters are all judged on their own merits.
Supplementary, let's...
To correct the record, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition brought into question the young offender centers and says there's an automatic release because of overcrowding. And I would ask that he withdraw that because that's totally in error.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll show him the memos that we had from his department later on, if you'd like. But my question to the Premier, is simply this. May I continue now?
Honourable member, the problem is that the inference was that it was an automatic release for all young offenders. The Solicitor General said that that generalization as a statement is not true. So therefore, if the generalization was made that then you have information that some are, then perhaps it would be better for you to withdraw the generalization, and then we could proceed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have other information, so I won't, and we can determine that later then. So, Mr. Speaker. My question is back to the Premier. They're a defensive lot today, aren't they, Mr. Speaker? But my question has to do with something that recently came up. The Unemployed Action Centre in Calgary has been operating a special youth employment program of particular use for young offenders. My understanding is that they requested $50,000 from the Solicitor General's Department and were turned down. My question to the Premier, will the Premier be suggesting to these young people that they should perhaps apply for employment as support staff on the Labour Law Committee's trips?
Mr. Speaker, again, it's the same answer, and that is that all of these matters are judged on their own merits.
Well, we're just trying to establish government priorities, and I guess we are, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, on June the 26th, the Minister of Social Services indicated she would have to find money from another allocation before the government could fund a province-wide Zenith line for battered women. My question to the Premier, what consideration has the Premier given to cancelling this Labour Law Committee's travel plans and directing the money to this Zenith line instead?
Mr. Speaker, again, any request of the government is dealt with seriously and judged on its own merits. But let me now say, Mr. Speaker, that the matter of the Labour Review Panel, as I said earlier, is a very important one to the people of Alberta, all the people of Alberta. And we have the finest selection of individuals from this province on that review panel. We're extremely proud of the fact that they were willing to accept that. Now, Mr. Speaker, they face some considerable dedication of their time away from their homes and working with a heavy responsibility. We appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. And we have 3 members representing organized labor. We have 3 members representing management, 3 members of the general public. A very balanced and effective group. And I come back and say, I think it's regrettable that the NDP are aligning themselves with Mr. Whirlin in trying to discredit this organization. They have asked, Mr. Speaker, for a Labour Review Panel. It was already in the throne speech. It's being created. Fine Albertans prepared to work for the good of all the people of the province. They aren't caring about the working people of the province. They're trying just to discredit another group of Albertans. They should be ashamed of themselves for aligning themselves that way.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Back to the original question, I do feel a little sorry for the Premier having to face an opposition, but nevertheless, it's feeding time. The seals are flapping their desk here. I would like to ask the Premier if he has finally decided who the lucky travel agent will be that will look after this $250,000 windfall, or is he waiting for a new company to be set up by another defeated Tory?
Mr. Speaker, kind of a foolish question, but the first part I thought I'd respond to, and that is in thinking about an opposition and being in the House before, both sides, I've met a lot better oppositions, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Labour as a supplementary. In terms of the format being used by the committee, has the Minister considered a subcommittee travelling to these various places rather than the whole committee? And what type of pre-work is being done by the committee to prepare themselves before they go to these faraway places?
Mr. Speaker, consideration has been given to dividing the committee up, but in view of the nature of the people who are on the committee and the responsibility that they have, it was felt that rather than have individual members of the committee reporting to other or subgroups of the committee reporting to the rest of the committee, that would inevitably start a sort of second-hand process, and we didn't want to do that. The consideration was given to the matter, however, and the decision was not to do it. Perhaps while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, this would be a suitable time to inform the Assembly that yesterday afternoon I received information by telephone directly from Mr. Jack Murray that he was resigning from the committee, and he has been replaced by Mr. Joe Berlando of the Alberta Teachers Association.
Member for Calgary North Hill.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour. Will the agenda of the review committee and its work, and including its itinerary, be determined by the Minister's department, or by the Minister as the chairman, or by the committee itself?
Mr. Speaker, I'm tempted to adopt the Premier's technique and say yes, yes, and yes, but perhaps I should explain a bit more thoroughly than that. The situation is that the department have for some weeks been doing much preparatory work, preparing briefing material, indeed the material I went over myself. Some of that material has now been passed on to the members of the committee at the meeting on Tuesday afternoon. They are now studying that material. Some decisions were made by myself, and other decisions have been and will be made by the committee. In other words, what we are attempting to do with reasonable haste, which I think is the term I've used before, we are attempting with reasonable haste to make a full review of our own and other labour legislation, and various decisions are being made by various people in order to expedite that process.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
This question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Community Health. The approach taken by the provincial government in the provision of psychiatric services to adolescents is clearly one of a crisis intervention rather than prevention.
Member, please. Yesterday, the matter of this topic was discussed not once but twice. And so the chair awaits careful framing of the question that we're not reverting back to the same questions being asked time and time again.
Mr. Speaker, it has been carefully thought out. There were a series of 3 questions, and they cover different areas. And this is in the community health field. And as I mentioned, it clearly, this government's one is a crisis intervention rather than prevention. That's the key word, prevention. To see evidence of this lack of preventive focus in the increasing numbers of adolescents, we see the increase all the time, is Alberta psychiatric hospitals, as we raised yesterday. But does the minister have any plans to implement a province-wide media campaign aimed at educating parents and adolescents on adolescent mental health, as ADAC has so successfully done with their teenage alcohol abuse campaign?
Mr. Speaker, I had the good fortune to read yesterday's transcript of the exchange of questions between the honourable member and 2 ministers on this side of the House. And I appreciate the representation by the honourable member. And but I would like to just reinforce that which my colleague said. that if the member has any particular cases where he has some particular concerns, we on this side would certainly welcome that information. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House believe that our job is never done, that more can be done, and we are working on a child on psychiatric services for children in this province. A number of government departments are in the process of working on that very important initiative now. We'll be going out to the people of Alberta on a consultative basis, and that group will be reporting back to us, providing advice as to future directions in the provision of psychiatric care for all of the children in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, it's not quite what we're on. I'm on the question of public knowledge campaign. But what is the minister doing to improve public knowledge of and accessibility to mental health support services in order that more adolescents receive the help they need before they have serious problems and before they develop?
Mr. Speaker, the member has a very good point in that prevention, clearly prevention before the treatment is required. Focusing on the family is just so very, very important. And I think that Alberta is well served by the 56 regional mental health clinics throughout this province, plus some 48 more traveling mental health clinics that do a circuit throughout the province. So, Mr. Speaker, at least 104 communities in this province are serviced on a regular basis by the Alberta Mental Health Services within the Department of Community and Occupational Health.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, obviously something's not working out right with the 56 clinics, and the cases are still increasing. So what do you think, would this government allocate funds for much-needed research into the cause and prevention of child and adolescent mental health problems in order that services can be designed to address the problems more effectively and before, not after the case is developed?
Well, I repeat again, Mr. Speaker, that if the honourable member has cases, has incidents that he'd like to bring to our attention that are not being looked after, that are not being addressed, then I welcome that, as do all of my colleagues. And I think that it's important. I think it's incumbent upon the honourable member to do just that, instead of waving some mythical white flag about of alarm that we're not able to deal with because it's a blank white flag.
Mr. Speaker, I think there's any blanks here. It might be in the minister's thinking on the project. But the point is, what we're trying to get across here is the identification, and I don't think we can depend on 80-some MLAs to go around and identify ahead of time. So what I want to get across is the government taking the initiative of utilizing after-school care or daycare facilities as potential vehicles for early identification of psychiatric disorders in children, rather than waiting for an MLA to come tell you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess I could rhyme off all of the centers, including the 56 mental health clinics, including the 48 traveling clinics, including the 27 health units and the multiple number of subunits, the family and community support services, the daycare centers, the after-school care centers where professionals are at work on a day-to-day basis identifying any problems that do come up and reporting that back to the school system, reporting it to doctors, reporting it to hospitals, reporting it to the Alberta Mental Health Services. And Mr. Speaker, those people are out there. They are responsible nurses, physicians, and other specialists trained in their field who are identifying these problems and finding solutions for them.
Supplementary member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, has he determined if there are any blanket programs to ensure that all school teachers and all school counselors are cognizant of the indicators of child sexual and physical abuse and violence in the family so that they, in fact, can report and deal with those problems?
Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt about the fact that the matter which the member raises on a regular basis is one that is of very serious concern to this government. And whether it's the Minister of Education and her officials, or whether it's any number of other ministries in this government, it is our attempt to raise the understanding of the very serious nature of what she is the problem that she's addressing. But yes, through the Department of Community and Occupational Health, and that's the one that I can best speak on, the 27 health units and the various sub-units around this province and the regional mental health clinics are making people in those communities, in those schools, understand just how serious a problem this can be, and doing their very best to identify the problems and act on those problems as soon as they've found them.
Leader of the representative party, followed by the member for Lethbridge West.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment. In discussions lately with the Mayor of Gleason, she indicated that the environmental officials have reviewed the waste in the town, and could the Minister report at this time what was found and whether a report has been filed with his office?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can report that I have received a report from officials from Alberta Environment that visited Gleason yesterday, and essentially there's a variety of materials that were found. Majority of the drums contain solidified glue similar to contact cement. One part of a drum contained linseed oil, one drum contained emulsified roofing tar, two drums contained chemical toluene. And I have to understand how to pronounce some of these words. And about 30 drums contained Picovard AP25, which is an alkali aromatic thermosetting resin. And 3 large tanks set at ground level in a pit. 2 of them contained toluene. And the conclusion given to me is the only dangerous goods identified on site were toluene. Due to the relatively good conditions of the drums and tanks, there is no imminent danger to the environment. There's no sign that any of the drums were leaking. I've instructed environment officials to gather up the drums containing toluene and have them stored in an appropriate site in the province of Alberta. Despite the fact that I'm not sure I have the authority to do that, I've said that it be done and take place.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate what research or investigations are going on in other centres of Alberta to determine and locate waste disposal sites or businesses, either active or inactive, that could contain hazardous wastes that are not documented at the present time?
Mr. Speaker, members will recognize and go back a number of weeks now here in the legislature when some drums containing industrial waste were located at Dow Chemical in Fort Saskatchewan. I'd indicated at that time that the government would be initiating a multi-phase program, and the government will be initiating such a multi-phase program, and around about the first week of October, the planning goes okay, we'll have a public information campaign in the province of Alberta with respect to a program called HELP, which will address itself to that kind of a situation. In addition to that, correspondence will be addressed to all municipalities in the province of Alberta, asking them to search their own records for any kind of storage dump containing any kind of waste that may have occurred in the province of Alberta prior to 1973, when legislation came in requiring these types of materials to be stored and identified. The situation in Gleason is a very strange situation. In the last several days, in the research that I've had undertaken with respect to this matter, indicates that on October 16, 1985, the town of Gleason had sent a letter to Taylor West Industries which is the owner of the property, advising that Taylor West Industries should undertake a cleanup within 30 days of receiving a notice of that letter dated October 16, 1985. And then the town also says that if this condition is not remedied within the specific time, council may act without further notice and shall remedy the condition as directed and apply the cost to the tax roll. And that certainly is a provision, a legal provision applied to any municipality in the province of Alberta if they are concerned about an abandoned site within their municipal jurisdiction. Further investigation also suggested that in terms of the taxes, and I asked the question of the mayor when I contacted the mayor on Tuesday last, if Taylor West was in arrears in terms of their property taxes, and the mayor said she didn't know. We undertook further investigation yesterday morning and determined that Taylor West had not paid property tax.
Thank you. The chair thanks the honourable minister, and the chair has undertaken further investigation of its own and discovered that all the further supplementaries have now been answered. The chair recognizes the member for Lethbridge West, followed by the member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question to the Honourable Minister of Labour in his capacity as a minister responsible for professions and occupations. And, Mr. Speaker, it relates to Bill 47. In view of the fact that some 240,000 Albertans utilized the services of chiropractors last year, why is the minister restricting the practice of chiropractors?
Mr. Speaker, I think perhaps first I should explain that Bill 47 will amend the as-yet unproclaimed Chiropractic Profession Act of 1984. In that act, without getting into debate on the bill, there was developed a definition of chiropractic which has caused considerable difficulty to chiropractors and to myself. And since that bill was passed by the legislature, the chiropractors themselves have realized the difficulty with double registration. There is certainly no attempt to restrict the practice of chiropractors except to prevent them from practicing as naturopaths as well, since the disciplinary function would be complicated by the ability of the individual who was double registered to skip from one profession to the other to avoid disciplinary proceedings.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Why then is the minister restricting or stopping the use of X-ray equipment by chiropractors?
Mr. Speaker, I think there's some misunderstanding there. I mentioned the definition of chiropractic, and in the definition that that exists in the unproclaimed 1984 Act, there is reference to X-rays, other modalities of treatment and investigation, or something like that. That's the phrase that has been removed, but the removal of it does not prevent the chiropractor from using X-rays. It was the difficulty of defining and regulation in view of improvements in X-ray equipment and techniques, the difficulty of defining and regulation as was required in the 1984 statute. But in no way will this prevent chiropractors from using X-ray equipment as they have traditionally done and as they continue to do.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary that would put this member at ease. As the Honourable Minister met with the Alberta Chiropractic Association, representing some 310 members prior to these proposed changes in legislation coming in?
Mr. Speaker, let me reassure the House that there have been many meetings between myself and the executive of the Alberta Chiropractic Association and between my officials and their executive as well, and that all of these changes are indeed initiated to a large extent by the association and have their approval.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry, followed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to question the matter of Gleason and would state from the outset that I feel I'm going into new areas that as yet haven't been dealt with, and the questions have been framed very carefully. And in fact, you will note that one was scratched out and changed because it would have been redundant. Okay, I would like to ask the minister if in the list of fines that he went through, considering that the owner stated there was trichloroethane on the site as well and he still had use for it, did the minister in fact find, or did his people find any drums or containers for which the contents were not identified and that there will be more sophisticated testing required to identify them?
Yes and yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'm not used to answers quite that brief.
Especially from that minister.
I hardly got to sit down. What steps has the minister taken to improve procedures and communication in his department, given that there seemed to be a 3-month lapse between the first visit and his notification of the problem?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I've already referred to the action that I said that I would undertake on Monday of this week if it was determined to me that there was some failure on behalf of anyone in the Department of the Environment. But in reading the report that was written to file as a result of the investigation that took place in May of 1986, the information conveyed to the town of Gleason was that there were provisions in place for the town to, in fact, undertake final conclusion of this. It's regrettable indeed that an individual associated with Alberta Environment did not pursue this matter any further with senior officials, his superiors within the department, and eventually have the matter brought to my attention. And that certainly will be corrected. But there was an interesting statement made in the investigation which took place in May of 1928 when a statement was made to a Mr. S. Holt. No substance was found to be leaking or blowing away from any of the drums. I believe this is a local dispute which we need not be involved in. Mr. Holt stated that the mayor doesn't want to be, quote, heavy in solving this matter. Suggestion was made that the town could resolve it.
Thank you. I'll look forward to checking into that myself. I was interested that the minister seemed comforted that grass was growing around the drums, and this indicated everything was safe. I'm wondering if the minister is going to undertake a study to inform himself of the difference between substances that are harmful to grass and those that give off fumes that could be deadly to humans.
I think, Mr. Speaker, what's really important is that when I was asked outside of the House yesterday for a preliminary comment with respect to this particular matter, I said that I had only had, at that point in time, a preliminary assessment with respect to grass, and I indicated that yesterday that further investigations would take place. Today, when I was asked by the member from Little Bow whether or not we had anything further to offer, I provided him with the specifics that I had. And just a few minutes ago, the member from Edmonton Glengarry indicated to me would further tests be undertaken, and I responded yes. But one indication in terms of the impression that the member tried to convey in terms of the public news media earlier in the week, that there was something really terrible going on here. One indication is that if the environment close to drums or pits or whatever the heck they are is sterile and no growth does occur, that one allows one to conclude that something may be amiss. But if there appears to be health in the environment surrounding drums in question, one should, with common sense, be able to make a suggestion that it would appear that not all has gone awry and astray. And it was in that light that the comment was made by myself.
Thank you. There are still two problem spots on the site that I'm concerned about and haven't been mentioned, and that is two completely buried underground tanks facing Main Street on the site, and I'm wondering if those were opened and the contents tested, considering they are very large tanks and could be dangerous.
I think I responded to that in the first question that the honourable member raised when he said, is any further testing going to take place? And I said yes.
Member for Little Bow, final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, approximately just over a year ago, the owner of Taylor West Industries lost his 3 sons in one of the containers on site. Could the minister assure the House that those containers will be either locked securely or removed from the site as quickly as possible?
It's my understanding that the 3 deaths that occurred in 1981, Mr. Speaker, not in 1985, and it's my understanding that as a result of the reports of the medical examiner, the inquiry, the public inquiry that took place in 1981, that action has occurred, but I will do a double and a triple check to ensure that it has in fact happened.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by the member for Edmonton Belmont.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Social Services. The problem of battered women, which affects about 55,000 Alberta women, must be addressed through a public awareness campaign. A lifestyle media campaign like that done by the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Commission was recommended in 1984 by the Federal Provincial Working Group on Wife Battering, and again in 1985 by this government's own special report on family violence. The government's been thinking about this for a long time. When are we going to see a province-wide 8-act style media campaign on wife battering?
Mr. Speaker, the whole area of family violence, and I think that it should be discussed as a whole, is a very important matter to continually have before us, because obviously while we've launched a fair number of programs, they haven't met with the kind of success that we would like to see. I know that the Honourable Minister of Education is not in her chair at this time, but I know as a result of some of the recommendations that came out through the recommendations that the Honourable Member has mentioned through the federal group, that education was a very important component. And to that end, there's been a lifestyle course piloted, others proposed, and so on. And so certainly the schools have a fairly important role to play in the lives of young people as they form their attitudes about their future life. I would say that the Honourable Member should also be aware of the major booklet that we produced that spoke to family violence, that we hope will be shared with communities right across the province in order that people will become more aware.
Thank you. Could I pursue this question beyond the Department of Education, specifically with respect to what Social Services is doing? Is this package, which is entitled Family Violence Prevention, which includes a number of pamphlets on the area of family violence, all that the Minister herself is doing by way of a public awareness campaign outside of the schools for the public in general?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in a more of a treatment sense, and particularly with the type of workshops that are seen to be needed in various communities and communities themselves organized, obviously we would supply speakers, we would supply information for those that are interested and believe that they have such a problem of a magnitude that it has to be addressed more en masse in a community. So certainly where we are called upon, we haven't launched a provincial-wide campaign, a media campaign, as the Honourable Member has raised, but we certainly respond to requests where they evolve.
How effective can that approach to this kind of problem, and how effective can these kinds of pamphlets be when they're only given to people who request them? Surely the Minister isn't expecting that a wife batterer will actually make the effort to pick up these pamphlets, read them, and then stop battering his wife.
Mr. Speaker, I find this topic obviously to be a very difficult one, because all of us in this legislature and Albertans as a whole, as I have spoken to them and they have communicated with me, also find the area very difficult, and they're very concerned about it. And this concern radiates through various communities, and I've indicated that I've had a fair amount of contact. So there's one other thought that also radiates through those communities, and that is that the people in this legislature and the MLAs, as they go through their constituencies, cannot be entirely responsible, nor can they hold themselves up to be the saviors of the families in this province. And so I say to the Honourable Member, all of us must try very, very hard within the resources that we have to implore our communities and citizens to contend and come face to face and try to deal with this problem wherever it arises.
The government tried very hard with respect to alcohol and drug abuse, and it's to be congratulated for its 8-act campaign. That kind of campaign is more than appropriate for this area. Will the Minister confirm that funds are being allocated right now in the 1987 budgetary process, which is taking place at this time, or are we going to miss this opportunity as well to provide funds for this important media campaign in this very vital area?
Mr. Speaker, what we're really talking about here, in my view, and in the view of many others, is a reinforcement of more positive lifestyles right across the province. And again, I would say that hopefully the Honourable Member will concur that this is an area where education does help a lot, It's the type of thing that can be discussed within the classroom, with information going to young people who have it for their consideration and determining what type of future they will have in their conduct in the future. I would also remind the honourable member that I believe it was yesterday, in response to one of his colleagues' questions, I spoke about having put aside funds in the Calgary region that deals with the whole area of child abuse, which is again part of the family violence syndrome. And we're looking very much for the forward to the proposal that will come out of some $600,000 that we will allocate for suggestions that can help to deal with this area.
Time for question period has expired. Might we complete this one set of questions? Opposed? Carried. Member for Edmonton Highland.
Supplement the answers given by my honourable colleague. I should mention to the House that this topic has indeed been one discussed at length by our government as part of the Intergovernmental Working Group on Family Violence, the report of which was tabled in the legislature some time ago. Since that point, there has been, in fact, a number of additional steps taken, particularly within the Department of Education, the results of which have been just recently relayed to me. The report that we indicate is representative of a concerted effort from across all of the departments of government. As the Honourable Minister of Social Services indicated, the Department of Education and the programming which we're involved with there is a major part of that instance. The public campaign is one that we're assessing in concert with options and programs initiated of that sort in other governments, and we hope that as part of an overall plan combined with those that we've already initiated, it will be considered. I might say, incidentally, that I think any of the governments involved in that program would indicate that Alberta has been doing as much, if not more, than most provinces in the country, and we look forward to doing even more in terms of dealing with this very crucial problem.
Supplementary, Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister for Social Services would assure the members of the Assembly that she would personally undertake to gather studies to indicate the extent of wife battering in the province, bring him personally to the Premier and discuss them with him so he can understand that in fact there is a high priority for this and not just for globe-trotting on Labour legislation reviews.
Member for Calgary-McKnight.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I don't know whether I should address this to the Minister of Social Services or to the Attorney General, but I would like to know if the Minister is pursuing with vigour those cases where people have been accused of wife battering and are laying charges to ensure that in cases where there is a strong indication of this taking place, that proper legal action is being taken.
Mr. Speaker, I think probably my honourable colleague will want to supplement the answer in terms of my own experience and the responsibility that our department has. Certainly where information comes into our hands that it appears that there would be some criminal element to it in terms of possible charges, that information has to be relayed immediately to the proper authorities to be dealt with.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps I could supplement the question. Members who are new to the Assembly may not be aware that my predecessor, as a matter of policy, directed police forces throughout the province to lay charges in cases of wife battering. And if my memory serves me correctly, that was within the last 2 to 3 years. Members will be aware that it had been a case, a situation where often the victims had, after reflection or due to pressure, had refused to proceed with the evidence necessary to carry out successful convictions. And that is an important step forward, and I think that some review would be useful to indicate whether or not there have been increased charges, successful charges, and I would undertake to the Assembly to try and find that information out for honourable members, because I think it is an important issue facing Albertans.
Orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, today I would move that the motions for return 158, 160